Hello，同学们，我是 Sophia。这一期的视频呢，我给大家分享一下我们 PTE 模考 B 卷的听说读写4项的满分作答。那么之前呢，我已经给大家讲过这个 PTE 模考的重要性，以及我们这个模考该如何去利用。那么这一次的分享呢，就是我想给大家一个参考。那么你们去做了模考之后呢，也不要做完了就把这一套题放在一边了。你们在做的时候呢，要录制视频，然后要回过头去找自己的问题。那很多同学呢，他说我可能不知道正确答案是什么。所以呢，我这一期的分享呢，就把 B 卷的满分作答分享给大家。那么你们之后在做过这一套题之后呢，可以去对比一下，比如说你的作答和我的作答有一些什么样的出入，然后哪些题型上你可能答的不是特别好，你满分还有什么样的差距。比如说我的repeat sentence 10句，我每句大概能达到多少的内容，然后我的阅读完意填空，或者说我听力的小题，大概准确率是50%呢，还是说是80%，对吧？大家一定要细致的去看一下自己还存在一些什么问题，把这个模考题呢充分的利用起来，而不是说这个模考题做完了之后我看个分数就完事儿了，对吧？而不是说这一套模考题我做完了之后看一下分数就结束了，那这样的话其实你并没有把这个模考题利用好。由于这个测试呢3个小时比较长，然后我当时录制的时候，不知道为什么这个视频就是大概前2/3还是正常的，后面1/3就是听力那一部分的音频的声音没有录下来，然后所以说从口语之后的这个听读写部分呢，我就做了一个加速的处理，主要是给大家看一下我的一个参考答案吧。那么前面的口语部分的话是没有什么问题的，后面部分呢大家也可以看到这个作答，那么希望呢就是对大家也有一些帮助啊。最后呢也提醒一下大家，如果你在做这个模考的时候要去录制视频呢，你也可以按照听说读写4段来录，比如说我 speaking 做完了之后我就保存一下这一段录屏，然后再来录写作的最后呢再来录听力和阅读的，这样我一次性把它录制出来，因为那个视频太长了，所以说后面听力阅读部分就有一点点问题。希望大家在做模考和知识考试整个备考的过程都顺顺利利的。如果说有什么问题的话，欢迎大家随时私信我，或者说在视频下方留言。
I'm here now and I'm ready to start learning. I'm here now and I'm ready to start learning. I'm here now and I'm ready to start learning. I'm here now and I'm ready to start learning. The course includes an extensive unit on climate change and requires all students to read the Stern Review on the economics of climate change, which was published last year. The course delves into the science behind the issue, the challenges it poses to business and government, as well as a discussion of possible solutions. The course includes an extensive unit on climate change and requires all students to read the Stern Review on the economics of climate change, which was published last year. The course delves into the science behind the issue and challenges it poses to business and government, as well as a discussion on possible solutions. In the fast-changing world of modern healthcare, the job of a doctor is more and more like the job of a chief executive. The people who run hospitals and physicians' practices don't just need to know medicine. They must also be able to balance budgets, motivate a large and diverse staff, and make difficult marketing and legal decisions. In the fast-changing world of modern healthcare, the job of a doctor is more and more like the job of a chief executive. The people who run hospitals and physicians' practices don't just need to know medicine. They must also be able to balance budgets, motivate a large and diverse staff, and make difficult marketing and legal decisions. Environmental problems caused by hard rock mining involve water pollution by metals themselves, chemicals in processing, acid drainage and sediment. Metals and metal-like elements in the ore are toxic and prone to cause trouble by ending up in nearby streams and water tables as a result of mining operations. Environmental problems caused by hard rock mining involve water pollution by metals themselves, chemicals used in processing, acid drainage, and sediment. Metals and metal-like elements in the ore are toxic and prone to cause trouble by ending up in nearby streams and water tables as a result of mining operations. In recent years, there have been one or two significant happenings that have kept alive the hope that the deep sea may conceal strange links with the past. In December 1938, off the southeast tip of Africa, an amazing fish was caught alive, a fish that was supposed to have been dead for at least 60 million years. In recent years, there have been one or two significant happenings that have kept alive the hope that the deep sea may conceal strange links with the past. In December 1938, off the southeast tip of Africa, an amazing fish was caught alive, a fish that was supposed to have been dead for at least 60 million years. In multilingual countries, co-mixing, the use of more than one variety in the same utterance or sentence and code switching, the use of different languages or varieties between sentences is common natural, despite its frequency, or perhaps because of it. Some scholars and self-appointed guardians of linguistic morality view both co-mixing and code switching as a sign of linguistic efficiency. In multilingual countries, co-mixing, the use of more than one variety in the same utterance or sentence and code switching, the use of different languages or varieties between sentences is common and natural, despite its frequency, or perhaps of it. Some scholars and self-appointed guardians of linguistic morality view both co-mixing and code switching as a sign of linguistic deficiency. In this landmark account, first published over 20 years ago, the author argues that the ignorance and discharge of the poor are the direct result of the whole situation of economic, social, and political domination. By being kept in a situation in which critical awareness and response are practically impossible, the disadvantaged are kept submerged. In this landmark account, first published over 20 years ago, the author argues that the ignorance and discharge of the poor are the direct result of the whole situation of economic, social, and political domination. By being kept in a situation in which critical awareness and response are practically impossible, the disadvantaged are kept submerged.
Students must observe lab safety regulations at all times.
Students must observe lab safety regulations at all times.
It's the words of common occurrence that have different referential value.
It's the words of common occurrence that have different referential value.
The office said Dr. Smith will arrive later today.
The office said Dr. Smith will arrive later today.
Student Services provides help with housing and transport.
Student Services provide help with housing and transport.
A study skills seminar is on for students who require assistance.
A study skill similar is on for students who would require assistance.
Any textual references you make should be cited appropriately in the footnotes.
Any textual references you make should be cited appropriately in the footnotes.
The research paper should begin with a thorough review of the literature.
The research paper should begin with a thorough review of the literature.
The aesthetic implications of this study have not yet been fully explored.
The aesthetic implications of the study have not yet been fully explored.
The inherent tension between these two features remains to be addressed.
The inherent tension between these two features remains to be addressed.
Journalism is the collection and publication or transmission of news.
Journalism is a collection and publication or transmission of news. 36, 34. This graph gives information about larger cities in worldwide in millions in 1950, 2000, and 2015, including London, Tokyo, New York, Sao Paulo, Mexico City, Tokyo, Delhi, Mumbai in Bombay, and Tokyo. According to the graph, the highest figure is showing Tokyo, which is 36. According to the graph, the lowest figure is showing London, which is 8. According to the graph, different cities have different figures. In conclusion, if the figures continue the same trend, it will be hard to predict in the future. 3,600, 2000, 1975, 1980, 1985, 1990, 1995. Europe and Central Asia. World Africa. Kilocalories per day. This graph gives information about kilocalories per day from 1975 to 1995 in North America, Europe and Central Asia, World and Africa. According to the graph, the highest figure is showing 1995, which is 3,600. According to the graph, the lowest figure is showing 1975, which is 2,200. According to the graph, different years have different figures. In conclusion, if the figures continue the same trend, it will be hard to predict in the future. 41.4, 71.1, 17.1, 4.8, 19.5. This graph gives information about Figure 1 injury location, including school, child care, other roads, work, home, and leisure and sport. According to the graph, the highest figure is showing home, which is 41.4%. According to the graph, the second highest figure is showing roads, which is about 19.5%. According to the graph, the lowest figure is showing other, which is 2%. According to the graph, different locations have different figures. In conclusion, if the figures continue the same trend, it will be hard to predict in the future. 5,300,000, 5,300,000, 3,050,000. 2031 projected. 1976 census. 2001 census. This graph gives information about population growth and projected population of Sydney from 1976 to 2031. According to the graph, the highest figure is showing 2031 projected, which is about 5,300,000. According to the graph, the lowest figure is showing 1976 census, which is about 3,050,000. According to the graph, different years have different figures. In conclusion, if the figures continue the same trend, it will be hard to predict in the future. This 16,000, 1,670, 1,483, 1,450. This graph gives information about the height of different towers, including Taipei 101 in Taipei, Petronas Towers 1 and 2 in Kuala Lumpur, and Sears Towers in Chicago. According to the graph, the highest figure is showing Sears Towers in Chicago, which is 1,450 feet. According to the graph, the lowest figure is showing Petronas Towers 1 and 2, which is 1,483 feet. According to the graph, different towers have different figures. In conclusion, if the figures continue the same trend, it will be hard to predict in the future. This graph gives information about manufacturing output in the UK in percentage from 1999 to 2007. According to the graph, the highest figure is showing 1999, which is about 104. According to the graph, the lowest figure is showing 2003, which is 96. According to the graph, different years have different figures. In conclusion, if the figures continue the same trend, it will be hard to predict in the future. According to the graph, the second highest figure is showing 2001, which is about 105. According to the graph, the second lowest figure is showing 2000, which is 102. In conclusion, it's a very interesting picture.
Milk is not typical of all monasteries for many reasons. First, it is very grand, which most, especially later foundations, aren't. Secondly, it was founded in the countryside, whereas in the 17th and 18th centuries, a good proportion of foundations were made in towns. Thirdly, it still owns a substantial amount of land, because fourthly, it lies in the Austrian Republic, the only European country where grand old monasteries have been in continuous existence since they were founded, 900, 1,000, even in one case 1,200 years ago.
This lecture is talking about Milk Monastery. According to the lecturer, speaker mentioned it is not typical for many reasons. According to the lecturer, speaker mentioned it is grand. According to the lecturer, speaker mentioned it was founded in the countryside. According to the lecturer, speaker mentioned others are made in towns. According to the lecturer, the speaker mentioned a substantial amount of land. According to the lecturer, speaker mentioned old monasteries were in continuous existence. In conclusion, this lecture is talking about Milk Monastery.
Corruption comes at a huge economic and social cost, and that cost is felt most acutely by the world's poor. Dr. Arnold has already given the staggering figure of $1 trillion US that's paid in bribes worldwide. It is an extraordinary figure. It's a figure that equals 10 times what is paid each year by donors in international development assistance, 10 times development assistance. And even this huge amount, $1 trillion, could be an underestimate because it's very difficult to capture a number of the more elusive transactions within the public sector that involve corrupt dealings, such as budget leakages and asset theft. Corruption sharpens income inequality and it impacts disproportionately on the poor. In many countries, corruption works as a regressive tax on household incomes. Regressive because it impacts much more on the poor than the more wealthy. Compared with higher income groups, lower income families pay a much larger share of their incomes in bribes to access basic public services, and their overall access to those services is reduced.
This lecture is talking about corruption. According to the lecturer speaker mentioned, it is huge economic and social cost. According to the lecturer speaker mentioned, it is felt by most of the world's poor. According to the lecturer speaker mentioned, the figure of $1 trillion. According to the lecturer speaker mentioned, the budget market leakage and ethics shift. According to the lecturer speaker mentioned, it sharpens inequality. According to the lecturer speaker mentioned, it impacts more on the poor than on the wealthy. According to the lecturer, this lecture is talking about corruption versus development aid.
This is Hans Krebs, who in 1937 published a paper showing the sequence of chemical reactions by which energy is released in individual cells. It's called the Krebs cycle, which some of you may remember from your chemistry course in high school. Krebs is a wonderful example to me of how a scientist who is determined can overcome all kinds of human obstacles. Krebs' father constantly discouraged him and told him that he had just mediocre intelligence and would never do anything important in his life as a teenager. What Krebs remembers in his memoir, his father said to him, "You can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear." And later on, when Krebs studied with the great biochemist Otto Warburg, Warburg also told him the same thing, not the same quote, but that he had only mediocre ability and would never be a great scientist. And we all hear about how important it is for parents to encourage their children, but sometimes the children will go on to do great things no matter what we say to them.
This lecture is talking about Hans Krebs. According to the lecturer, speaker mentioned Hans Krebs is in 1937. According to the lecturer, the speaker mentioned he published a sequence of chemical reactions. According to the lecturer, speaker mentioned Krebs cycle and a wonderful example of scientist. According to the lecturer, the speaker mentioned he can overcome all kinds of human obstacles. According to the lecturer, speaker mentioned his father discouraged him and told him that he has mediocre intelligence. According to the lecturer, the speaker mentioned a biochemist told him the same thing. According to the lecturer, speaker mentioned the children will go on to do great things no matter what we say to them. In conclusion, this lecture is talking about Hans Krebs.
To which of our senses do all of the following words relate? Opaque, vivid, brilliant, shiny.
Vision. Vision.
In a recession, does economic activity increase, slow down, or stay the same?
Slow down. Slow down.
In medical terms, are antibodies harmful or beneficial for patients?
Beneficial. Beneficial.
Would a person suffering problems with their vision consult a biologist or an optometrist?
An optometrist. Optometrist.
Would fresh milk last longer in a fridge or in a cool cupboard?
In a fridge. In a fridge.
Historians use evidence to draw conclusions about the past. Would a contemporary artist's painting of an ancient battle be an original source or a secondary source?
A secondary source.
What is the subject of study at a culinary institute?
Cooking.
Where would you expect to find equipment like microscopes, Bunsen burners, beakers, and petri dishes?
Laboratory.
What is the name of the field of study that studies the human mind and behavior?
Psychology.
A planet or galaxy that is very distant can be seen with what device?
Telescope.